Welcome to Unsheltered Conversations, the podcast from HomeAid America, where we explore the people, the partnerships, and ideas shaping solutions to homelessness and housing across the country. I'm Scott Larson, CEO of HomeAid America. Today's conversation is with someone whose career has helped shape the home building industry in California for decades. Tom Grable recently retired as division president of Pointe Homes in Southern California after a remarkable career leading land acquisition, development, and home building operations across one of the most complex housing markets in the country. He has also been deeply involved in industry leadership, serving as the chairman of the California Building Industry Association and in numerous advocacy roles, helping shape housing policy statewide. And in recognition of that impact, Tom is being inducted into the California Home Building Foundation Hall of Fame, one of the highest honors in the industry. Tom, welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Scott. It's great to be here.
And Tom, you and I have known each other for many years, as we both have worked intimately within the Building Industry Association of Southern California in a lot of different policy discussions. But let's start at the beginning. You've had a long and impactful career in home building. What first drew you into this industry?
Well, you really are going back to the beginning. So, there are kind of two kinds of people that in leadership in our industry that come from one area or another, in the sense of there are those who knew that home building was all they ever wanted to do because maybe they grew up with the contractor, their father or their parents were involved in contracting, or they were home builders themselves or what have you. And that was the course they wanted to do. That was not me. I literally was a senior in college, graduating with a communications degree with emphasis in journalism, public relations, and advertising. And I knew that I didn't want to go work for an agency, and I wasn't going to go work for a newspaper. And my last year in college, I had my last foray into elective office, and that was as Associated Students Vice President. And when you're in student leadership, you have a lot of companies that actually come to you to recruit you because looking for student leaders. There are a lot of positives for singling those people out. So I was having Fortune 500 companies, ask me to interview with them for sales management positions, company car, expense account. And I didn't want that. I saw myself as managing an organization, managing a business. I took a class in career exploration, and I don't bore you with all the details, but through a battery of personality tests, skills assessments, aptitude testing, and a whole lot of other skills that they did other than just teach us how to write cover letters and resumes, is they really did kind of hone down on what sort of industries would be of interest. For some reason, my entrepreneurial skills scores came out off the charts. And they said, if you want the most management experience the fastest, go into retail. So I did. My first 2 years out of college, I worked for the Broadway department stores after interviewing with all the big retail chains and got offers from 3 out of the 4, and the 4th one I was waiting for, but I accepted the job offer with the Broadway. Now, all those stores, Broadway, Bullock's, Robinson's, May Company, they're all now Macy's. So I worked through the executive training program, went through 4 months of training in various operations and buying office assignments, and then out to the stores. And then while I was in the store, graduating in my store training, I was graduating out of the program. I'm going to be interviewing competitively against my peers in the program. And there was a department that opened up in the store that I was in, and I lobbied for the job. I became the cosmetics manager.
That's great.
I had 22 women working for me. Half of them had been in the store longer than I had been alive, and most of them had been in the department that long as well. So I was managing my mothers and my grandmothers. And so that was my first management job. I did that for a year and a half, or I got through 2 Christmases and a couple of months.
Survived 2 Christmases.
Survived a couple of Christmases, Valentine's Days, and Mother's Days. But I was promoted to an assistant buyer. But I spent 2 years in retail and got to know all aspects of it. That sounds like a divergence. I'll get back to that. So after 2 years, I knew that wasn't the career path I wanted. I wanted something that felt a little more meaningful. And my best friend from college, his older brother, who I got to know pretty well, was one of the senior people at an environmental and urban planning firm that did environmental impact reports, wrote city general plans, zoning ordinances, specific plans. So they did the policy planning, behind the scenes for cities and counties. And so I took a job with them, not as an employee at first, but I started as an actual intern. So I left a job as an assistant buyer making $24,000 a year in 1986 and left that to go be an intern making $450 an hour to run the Xerox machine. And so I literally started in this industry from the mailroom in a sense, but I spent a couple of years working for the planning firm, got a great experience on the policy side, writing those documents. I wrote significant portions of EIRs for things like the Newport Center expansion for Fashion Island, some big projects. So I got to know CEQA pretty well. But we also did a lot of work with developers, and I found that I really gravitated towards the entitlement side. And so I got involved in doing some of the support work that consultants do for developers while going through the approval process for projects. And I really enjoyed that and loved sitting in the strategy meetings and just listening to people who'd been decades in the business. I remember sitting in meetings with Richard O'Neill, the patriarch of the O'Neill family, Tony Moiseau's uncle. And sitting in meetings with him and his partners talking about commercial developments. And then eventually I got an offer for a job at a civil engineering firm. I worked there as their only planner on staff. And one of their clients, I was working on a very complex residential project for 720 homes in Orange. And that project went down in flames at 1:00 in the morning at a city council meeting. And that's when Watt Industries bought their partner in that project out. Their partner was the managing partner. They bought them out, and then they asked me to join Watt Homes to carry the project from the ashes up. And so a little over about a year later, I found myself a month past my 28th birthday, standing at the podium at the City of Orange City Council meeting and got a 553 home project approved. And one of the first things I realized is that as a consultant, when the project was first defeated, there were over 200 people in attendance in the audience who were, not happy with the proceedings, and they wanted the project denied, which it was. And so the first thing I realized I needed to do was go out in the community and get to know those people and find out, what the real issues were. And so I was knocking on doors on Thursday nights, Saturday mornings, and just introducing myself. That then led to doorstep conversations, to small group meetings on a cul-de-sac by cul-de-sac basis, and really engaged the community to the point when I went back to city council, 14 people showed up. They still didn't want a project approved there, but in their comments, they all had nice things to say about me and the process that they went through, basically giving the city council permission to go ahead and approve this project,
right.
Basically. So that was my first entitlement. I actually drove through that community a couple of weeks ago, and that community's been standing for 35 years.
Yeah. At the time you're touching on something that a lot of people, the general population, has no idea that goes into. You have the pre-development, the planning, the entitlement. They're living in their home, and there's communities that are established. But this whole process that you're describing of getting the approvals and really getting that buy-in, you've been intimately involved with that. And that's so critical to every home that's built, not only in the state, but across the country. So you've worked across multiple companies, and you've been there in an entitlement, you've been in land acquisition, and then ending your career with division leadership. So looking back, were there some defining moments that really, you talked about that opportunity at 28 years old to get a project approved? What other defining moments did you see that were real pivot points that shaped your career?
Well, I think probably just the nature of our business being as cyclical as it is, you learn the most when the times are toughest.
Like now.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. In a market like today, those that are early in their careers, mid-level managers in their careers, this is your opportunity to shine. This is really the time where you get to show senior management that you've got what it takes to take on more responsibility, which then leads to greater opportunities and advancement into leadership. And so I look at the recession back in the early 90s that was caused by the collapse of the savings and loan industry. That dragged on for 3 or 4 years, along with the Orange County bankruptcy that also compounded things. So those were at a time where I was early in my career and where I saw whole swaths of upper management, or even some parts of middle management, moved aside in reductions in force and consolidations of divisions. And so I became a survivor of those consolidations and those going from Watt Homes to Beazer Homes, company sales, things like that. Those all shape you. Every one of those big events gives you an opportunity to show the leadership above you what you can do.
And then as your career developed, we talked about, you eventually became division president for Pointe Homes, leading the operations across Southern California. And this is one of the most challenging housing markets in the country. When you got to that role as division president, what stood out about you, about your leadership, and what would people say about you in your leadership looking back at now the end of that time point in your career? What were you taught and what would people say about you?
Well, the first thing I would say is that my first opportunity to lead a division was actually at William Lyon Homes when I ran the Orange County division. I worked at William Lyon for 11 years, and I got to be a division manager for 2 of those 11 years. And then ultimately, Tom Mitchell called me at TriPointe and said, one morning, it's time to bring you in. Going back to the essence of leadership, when you have the opportunity, you take it. Sometimes you're not fully prepared for it. And so I learned a lot in those 2 years. When I got the opportunity at TriPointe, that was in 2014. At that point, I was much better prepared. And, I had the experience, had the scars on my shoulders and such, that was ready to shoulder the burden and lead the organization as I knew it needed to be led at that time. It also helped the fact that being part of the startup, working so closely with Doug Bauer, Tom Mitchell, Mike Grubbs at the time when they started the company was also just a huge benefit that when I got to take the reins, I was fully prepared to do so.
No, and you're dropping a lot of names that I'm very familiar with, and many of the people listening are as well. And you've been part of an industry that's been so dynamic. And then you're right, it's entrepreneurial, it builds communities, but it also gives back in meaningful ways. TriPointe and before that, William Lyon Homes have supported efforts like HomeAid and other nonprofits, both nationally and through things locally. How does that part of the industry, giving back and engaging in the community, how does that shape your perspective as a leader and what you've been able to do leading your teams?
One thing, our industry has always given back. And I think that's just inherent with what we do. To start with, we build communities. So, we actually build places where people live, go about their lives, raise their families. And so we're already in a giving business as it is. Now, sure, for those of us that are come from the market rate side, we're looking to turn a profit. And by the way, that is a very good thing because you can reinvest those profits back into doing new communities and doing it all over again. So we really start there. And when you're working in an industry that provides a basic need to start with, if people don't have the subject of this podcast overall and what you do is, helping people that are in need when they don't have housing. And so being that it is a basic need kind of tees up the platform for us to wanting to do even more than that. I remember when HomeAid came into existence, when Christine Deemer Iger was the executive officer at the BIA Orange County, and Mike Lennon, when they started, it was just the idea, and they were just getting it off the ground, and then what it's become today, a national institution now. The builders have always, being involved in the community. I can't tell you how many local chambers of commerce that I've been a member of. I can't tell you how many boys and girls clubs that we've supported in various communities that we've worked in. You want to ingratiate yourself in the communities that you're building homes because you want those homes to be a reflection of the community that you're building them in. And one way of doing that is through all the variety of nonprofits and community groups that do good works. And so you feel kind of compelled to get involved in those.
And Tom, you bring up a really good point where building communities, which is what this industry does, you're part of the community. And I don't know of any other industry that does that not only is building communities, but is engaged in their community and not only giving back, but volunteering. And you're mentioning chambers of commerce and boys and girls clubs and actively engaging your employees. And when you look at other industries, as good as they are, medical, technology, other aspects, there's nobody that does what this industry does in creating places for people to live, the parks that people play, the businesses, everything that's involved, because you're creating communities. And you've taken that concept of being involved to other levels of leadership within the industry. You served as the chairman of the California Building Industry Association and on numerous committees shaping housing policy, which gets back to the beginning of your career. What motivated you to step into that broader leadership role? Because not only are you leading a division, but you're actively involved in the association. And then to step into that role at CBIA as the chairman is a significant responsibility. What led you to do that? And what impact do you feel that you had in that role?
So I believe that my first exposure was I was told to go to a meeting, and I think it was a dinner meeting with the BIA Orange County back in late 80s, early 90s. And so I found there was benefit in that. Just being around people that were in the industry and the networking component of it was something I realized was important. I came to understand really years later that this is a relationship business, and it's the relationships that are formed that are really the nucleus of what we do. But in terms of getting involved in the association, it was really just starting with going to a few dinner meetings, the monthly dinner meetings. And then from there, I realized that there was a strategic purpose on one of the acquisitions that we had. We were working on the entitlements for it, and I needed some additional help, on the advocacy front, and approached BIA on that, and they were helpful. I thought, oh, okay, wow, this association actually does something I can use. So that was my first kind of realization that the association is there to benefit us in the industry. So I was when I was at William Lyon, I was asked to join the board of directors for the BIA Orange County chapter. And when you're asked to join the board, it's an honor to be asked in the first place, because obviously that you're now a known person in the industry, and you're known for having some kind of impact. And so you get asked to join the board. Like I said, it's a great honor to be asked to do so. But what you're doing is it's kind of like a putting your feet into what appears to be a calm stream. It's kind of comfortable. You go to events and you get to know people, and then you get asked to join a committee. Now they're asking you to wade out a little bit further.
Exactly.
Now you're knee deep. And then as you keep going, from a committee chair to the executive committee of the chapter, and then now you're in the chairs. Now you're chapter president, and then after that, you go on to the governing board for the region, and all of a sudden, that slow, calm-looking stream is a roaring river torrent. You're now being swept out. You're in the middle of the rapids, and you're headed to the falls.
Yeah.
But in fact, going up the ranks, I spent 20 years in leadership, from the BIA Orange County to the California Building Industry Association. And each one of those levels are extremely important. The local level as well as the state level, they're just as important as each other. They just serve different purposes. You're involved with different kinds of issues. Locally, you're involved with helping builders get their projects approved, policy positions that help to provide the framework to allow that to happen. But at the state level, you're working on actual policy of what cities and counties are required to use. So, you're working on issues that may be bigger in nature because of the policy scope, but it still comes down to the application and the operational level at the local city and county. So being in leadership in all those levels gives you different exposure to the different kinds of things that affect our industry from a policy standpoint and a process standpoint, but they're all kind of equally important. And those of us that get involved, it just adds to the breadth of our understanding of how this business actually works, in not only from a business, but in the economic ecosystem that we find ourselves, which includes the political aspect as well.
So, Tom, when you think about it, and you could go on for quite a bit with this, but to try to summarize, what makes housing in California so uniquely challenging? So you saw it at the local and up at the governance and policy level in Sacramento. If you could summarize, what has made it so uniquely challenging to build housing here in California?
Well, I think the first thing is who doesn't want to live in California?
Absolutely.
I'm looking out the window here, and it's a picture perfect day outside. So with the environment and with the lifestyle that we have here in California, we're just an attractive place to be. But going back 40 and 50 years ago, and I remember, those times 40 years ago when the NIMBY movement really started coming to its own. It's, people are like, hey, I came here for these reasons, this lifestyle. I don't want anyone else to come and enjoy it and add more traffic, add more houses, taking down the orange groves down the street. And so that's kind of where it started. And then it morphed into and started collaborating with other issues such as the environmental movement in our state, which became more and more prominent. And then a shift occurred. Our state went from being a very diverse, for the most part, a fairly purple state and politically very conservative in areas to now being very, very liberal. And in Sacramento, it is a progressive liberal agenda. And one of those is you look at, where their power base is. Environmentalists, unions, like building trades and carpenters unions, but unions in general, and then trial lawyers. Those three disciplines were diametrically opposed to the home building operations in our state. And so just from a political standpoint, our state it got to a point we were a no growth state. I mean, there were places where you could still build, and we did. But in general, the policy of our state now is to confine development within the existing edges of the urban footprint. So that really says that we've got to do 100% infill housing. And that just is not possible if you want to satisfy the housing policy crisis that we have in our state.
Yeah. So on that end, there's requirements that are coming down from Sacramento for certain cities or cities across and municipalities to build a certain amount of housing. And then, to meet affordability or just the level of housing, because there clearly is not enough housing in general. You talked about environmental issues. You've talked about being encapsulated into an existing community, not spreading out into other areas. You have the infill part of it. But are there other significant barriers to building housing? Because clearly, on our end, from HomeAid's perspective, and looking at homeless issues, looking at affordability for people coming out of college, young families, first-time homeowners, and then even aging seniors. So, what are the other barriers that you see that need to be overcome to build more housing?
Well, I think one of the most significant ones is CEQA is a massive barrier in what we do, and CEQA has morphed into what it was intended to do originally to what it does today. Originally, when most people don't understand that CEQA was signed into law by Ronald Reagan when he was governor back in 1971, I believe. And at that time, it was a resource. It was a process to go through a analysis and create a resource document for decision makers to use to mitigate for environmental impacts of public works infrastructure projects. That was
Public
the original
works. Yeah, public works. Yes.
It was not originally designed for, housing development or even commercial or industrial development. It was for public works. So apparently it works so well for public works. Why not just apply it to the private sector now too? So, and at the time though, and back when I first started in the industry, being involved in writing environmental impact reports, it was a resource document. It was just, here's the information. Let's look at it objectively and see if we can come up with a series of mitigation choices for a decision-making body to make. And then if they could choose to agree with our assumptions and recommendations or not. And if they don't, there's a path over here to come up with findings and overriding considerations of why we decided as a body not to go with what the report says. So it was just that. It's like, give us the information and we'll choose how we use that. Now it's become a blunt force instrument by a variety of special interest groups to hold up the development process. And I won't go into all the litany of what that means, but what it means to us now, and this is when I say us, not just builders, but people that are seeking out homes for their families, is there is less homes as a result of CEQA kind of being a catch-all, be-all, a net of every special interest group that wants something from a local jurisdiction, and they see builders and developers as the low-hanging fruit to go get that.
And we're seeing a lot of that, even those challenges, even most recently in the fires in Altadena and in the Palisades. You had existing communities that you would think, well, let's just rebuild, but they're having to overcome significant barriers to rebuilding even what they had, adding already to a significant shortage. So you've been in the room with many of these conversations, policymakers. Are you optimistic that we even are moving in the right direction? Or what would you say to other people that need to be in those rooms today? How can we make significant change?
Well, I'm optimistic, and I think that just goes with the territory of being a home builder. You have to be in.
You have to be. Yeah.
You have to be. You'll be consumed if you're not. But based upon, as you said, being in those rooms and hearing those conversations, I know that there is a desire to climb our way out of this housing policy crisis that's been developed. And I make that distinction. We don't have a housing crisis because if you remove the obstacles, barriers, and impediments out of the way of home builders, they will
They'll build
they
it.
will they'll deal with the supply chain, and they will get workers to their job sites, and they will build all the homes necessary to build. So in actuality, what we have is a housing policy crisis. The reason why we're not able to build homes that are affordable for families today is because of a lack of supply. The lack of supply is the result of housing policy in our state. So to your question, am I optimistic? I'm optimistic that ultimately something's going to give because it has to. You can't be selling, and I'm familiar now with some of the market areas up in Northern California, but in the Silicon Valley, you're buying a production home for $3.5–4 million. I mean, where the workers coming from that are working in the grocery stores? Where the workers coming from that work in your dentist office up there? I mean, you're creating a little microeconomic system that isn't sustainable. So something's going to give economically, but also has to give, policy wise. I know that Sacramento, the legislature, the governor, they talk about solving the problems. And I have to tell you that there are people in the legislature that I believe are extremely interested in solving this housing policy crisis. They just don't know how to.
Yeah. Well,
They,
and,
they,
and and with this being an election year, there's a lot on the table, and it'll be
yes,
interesting to see what changes one way or the other as we enter into 27. So
absolutely.
you're being inducted into the California Home Building Foundation's Hall of Fame. It's a great legacy, a great group of cohorts and people that have been involved with in the past in the industry, and it's a significant honor. When you heard the news that you were being inducted, how did that make you feel? What did it mean to you? And what are you going to reflect upon in the upcoming celebration at the Hall of Fame?
Well, to start with, I never, ever even imagined that this was even a path, or there's even a path to this honor. So from that standpoint, it's very humbling. And I mean that sincerely. I was the kid from Corona that, whose dad was a machinist, mom was a bookkeeper. We were a blue collar family. And, and then I was also the shortest kid in my class. And because of that, wasn't the star athlete. So, I had to, cut my way, on a different path and chose this one to do so, but to have it culminate with a recognition for all the things that I've been involved with is, like I said, very humbling. And the gravity of it, I still have to pinch myself because when you look at the names that are in the Hall of Fame, I mean, these are titans in the industry whose names were on the door when you walked up to the building. I mean, just iconic personalities. And I had a chance to work for a couple of those, Ray Watt and General Lyon, but also too, Doug Bauer and Tom Mitchell. And so having to follow in the footsteps of those kind, that even makes it more humbling. But in any case, it was a great honor when I got the call from Joan Webb and Larry.
Oh, Joan and Larry called you. That is fantastic.
Yes. And to keep it a family friendly podcast, I won't tell you exactly what Larry said, but in his very emphatic way said, Grable, answer your phone. We got some good news for you. So that's how it came about. And so to have Joan and Larry and Dan Dunmoyer call me that day and announce the news was a thrill.
That's great.
But I have to say, in this business, no one does this alone. What we do is a team sport.
Absolutely.
And the two groups that I would have to thank the most would be, number one, the teams that I've had a chance to work with over the years. I have some lifelong friendships that have developed over working with those team members, both employees together at home building companies, as well as the myriad of consultants and trade partners we work with over the years. People like such yourself. So no one does this alone. And so, and then the other group is our customers. Because at the end of the day, if they're not buying our products,
I-
it's all for naught.
it's all for naught. Absolutely. So alongside the Hall of Fame, you are also honored with the City of Hope Spirit of Life Award, and which is one of the most meaningful recognitions also in our industry, in not just for your leadership, but the philanthropic impact that it has had. Can you share what that recognition meant to you? Because that was most recently, maybe a year or two ago, that you received that honor by the City of Hope.
Yeah, it was October of 24. So yeah, a year and a half ago, and another incredible honor, and another one that I never ever thought possible. So to have someone ask, actually have the committee of peers that are in our industry, people like John Lavender and Nicole Burdett, ask you to be the Spirit of Life honoree for the Construction Industry Alliance, as they call it inside the City of Hope's organization. That was also a thrill and a huge responsibility, because you become the face of the annual giving campaign. And so I'm also very proud that the industry, we raised about $1.1 million that year, which puts it, on par with what the organization, does for the City of Hope. So it's gratifying to see that the industry rally around City of Hope, with my face at the my face at the top of the letterhead, I guess.
And for those that know or that don't know personally, as a cancer survivor, I've always had a deep appreciation for the work that the City of Hope does. And you're right, the way that the industry has rallied around that institution that has affected people and families and lives like mine in ways that are life changing. And I thought one of your quotes from that recognition was especially powerful, as you talked about how building homes creates an environment for people to live their lives, and how the City of Hope creates an environment for people to actually have a life. And that connection between what we build and how people live, it's really profound. And what do you think about that intersection of creating environments for people to actually have a life and what the City of Hope does?
So I'm going to start to answer that question this way. In what we do to build homes, we're building the place where people live their lives. We're literally building the space where they live their lives within, where they have their greatest victories. Also, there are some of the most challenging setbacks.
Yep.
And so where we create the space where people live their lives, people still have to live their lives. And I've often, reminded my teams in the past that what we do as home builders is important, because we provide people those spaces to live. So translate that from that forward, then people have to live. And City of Hope gives that opportunity with the technological advances that they've had. And having been involved with the City of Hope for a number of years now, I've actually witnessed the technological advances, and have had the opportunity to actually sit and have lunch with a researcher who just the week before had a groundbreaking discovery that she and her team have been working on for 5 years. And for her, it was like winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I talk about the home building industry, that we are one of the few industries where what we do affects people's lives on a daily basis. Everybody feels what we did for them on a daily basis by the fact that they're living in their home. As an occupation where you're affecting people's lives on a daily basis, when you think about your home, that's a very warm, comforting feeling. If you're having to spend every day thinking about your doctor, and you think about doctors in terms of revered professions, probably among the top. But if you're in an avocation where people are thinking about you every day, they're not in a good place. And so with that, when you have a situation where it's a life threatening situation, and now it's going to take a campaign to work through that, and hopefully with a silver lining or a complete victory at the back end, there's a lot at stake for that. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because you're a direct beneficiary of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so maybe to tighten it up a little bit, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you and others is that there's more to your story than just the business. And for you, that's music and playing guitar has been part of your life. Share a little bit about that, and how have you found that music has influenced your leadership and how you approach life?
People that have seen or have the opportunity to see me play in public, and in venues like the House of Blues in Anaheim and such, which is just phenomenal to play a big stage like that. or at the Grove in Anaheim. I've been playing guitar since I was 12 years old, so over 50 years. It's been my stress reliever. I could come home and turn up and work it out of my system. But also, too, I've had the opportunity to play with bands over the years. And going back to what I said earlier, a small kid on the playground and growing up where sports is such a big deal, I just wasn't physical enough to play football and basketball and baseball and all the great sports like all my friends were doing. So I played music. And when you play in a band, you're playing on a team. And you have the same kind of satisfaction of having a group of people with a common purpose coming together and making something happen. And when you can do it in front of other people who are enjoying it, all the better.
And I've had the opportunity and privilege to hear you play at industry events and perform before your peers. Not just a regular audience. Were there any special moments that you can share of you're playing before your peers, and how did that impact you? Because you're not just playing before an audience that you don't know; you're actually playing before your industry peers.
Well, and when you do that, it takes on a whole different level of gravity because you don't want to blow it.
Yeah.
So I would way rather play for 100,000 people at the Coliseum than play in front of 50 of my industry peers. You're alluding to a moment that happened back in 2022 where when we kicked off the Building Industries show, we had a kickoff party at the House of Blues in Anaheim. And my band actually got to be the opening band for that night. But then the main act was Sammy Hagar.
Yes.
And Sammy invited me to come on stage and play a little song with him. So, and it wasn't just Sammy Hagar.
Just a little song.
Just a little song. So we played Sammy's first hit back when he was in Montrose in 1973, I believe, Rock Candy, which is basically a 12-bar band blues song. And when you strip it all down, but it was a thrill not only just to meet Sammy on stage, or actually I met Sammy backstage. He and his wife were very kind even before the event started. And then on stage, he introduced me to the rest of the band, which included Michael Anthony of Van Halen as his bass player.
Yeah, just amazing. That was a once in a lifetime evening for those that were in the room.
When Michael, he poked me in the chest and slapped me on the shoulder and says, "Hey man, you can actually play." And the look on my face, because there's a YouTube video out there of it, the look on my face when I turn around is of disbelief, because in the back of my head, I'm going, "Oh my God, this just came from the bass player of Van Halen." And the drummer was Jason Bonham. So there's some heavyweights on that stage. And Vic Johnson, Sammy's lead guitar player at the time, is no slouch. And so to stand in front of almost 1,000, in fact, there was over 1,000 people there from our industry. Thinking about all the years I've been in this industry, I jokingly said to somebody once, I think I employed half the room at one time or another.
At one time or another, yeah.
On a project level, or in the trade contract or what have you.
Yeah, that was an amazing night.
My wife described it to others as the greatest moment of my husband's life, to which I then responded on social media, "Well, honey, our wedding day and the birth of our sons were still the bigger moments." and to keep the family viewing, my wife's response started with the second letter of the alphabet.
Yeah.
And
so Tom, as we look to wrap up part of our conversation today, the next generation of leaders, what advice would you give to them that are coming into the building industry?
The essence of leadership is, number one, you have to be effective. I mean, it sounds somewhat elementary. What does that mean? Well, it means everything. You have to get the mission done. And so on the one hand, you have to figure out how to be effective. But two very important pieces to that is the team that you have around you. When you have an amazing team around you, you do great things. And I've seen it happen. And the second thing that comes out of that is when you have a really great team that is the core, and from that, everything else emanates. And then you build culture on top of that, having the opportunity to work in an organization that was a startup. So it's kind of a blank canvas. So we got to take the elements of all the good things we learned from all the other building operational experience that we had and put it into one place and build TriPointe the way that we did. And specifically what became the Orange County, Los Angeles division itself, which was the startup division. That's the division that Doug Bauer, Tom Mitchell, and Mike Grubb started to start TriPointe Homes as a startup. And so for them to hand over those reins of the division they started was a tremendous responsibility. So I had to assemble a team of people that I knew would carry us to the next level because that was their expectation. And then from that, devise a culture. Two other qualities on the team aspect, creating a culture that encourages people to work with team members that they, one, mutually respect, and two, genuinely like. If you can have a culture that breeds those two characteristics of every one of your team members, by definition, you will be a high performance team. And the way that we manifested that at our division is not only did we have some tremendous banner years on the business side in terms of the business metrics that we're always measured by, profitability and rate of return, all those things. But our division, when I left the division, we were ranked number 4 nationally in customer satisfaction rankings with Alliant, probably the most comprehensive survey.
Correct.
Yes. And that's over 200 builder divisions across the country. Big divisions, but a lot of small divisions. And so for us to be in the top 10 and then number 4, and oh, by the way, after I left, they continued to get better. They actually occupied the number 1 spot at Alliant for something like 6 months last year.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I think they're still ranked number 3. That's a large division. We were able to have a team that developed a culture within. We set the stage, but the team actually ends up setting the culture ultimately. But that culture, when it kicked in, it didn't matter the volume that we did. Our quality didn't suffer because everybody cared.
And Tom, as we bring this all together, clearly this reminds me, the house that I'm in and that you're in and that all of us live in, it's not just a product. It's the foundation for the way we live our life. And all of that has been intentional by people like yourself. That started with entitlement and seeing a raw piece of land to ultimately those that did interiors and landscaping, et cetera, for your model homes. And it's very powerful what our industry does. And not only just what we build, but how we show up through work like HomeAid, community engagement, through groups like Boys and Girls Clubs, the City of Hope. This industry is such an impactful thing. And we've seen that through companies like Pointe and other partners across the country. And we're grateful for the leadership because Pointe, in virtually every community that HomeAid's at, is engaged with the work that we're doing. And the impact of your leadership and your legacy just continues on. And I know that as we started the conversation, you're technically retired, but we're not. You're still actively part of this industry and giving back. And you've spent decades working to improve how and where we build. And that lasting impact is just beyond the communities in and of themselves.
The last thing I'll say is that it's been a tremendous privilege to be in this industry, and because of the important things that we get to do, and that I personally have benefited from that in terms of the leadership opportunities and the tremendous challenges that we've been able to face and conquer and have the successes that we've had. But at the end of the day, as I said before, this is a team sport. And having individuals that you're able to surround yourself or you're part of who they surround themselves with, that synergistic team approach is what makes this business also so much fun to work in. And the collaboration. And then at the end of the day, we actually get to drive through the communities and the products that we created. Might sound a little Pollyannish, but when you drive through the neighborhoods that you are part of creating, and you see bikes and trikes in the front yard and basketball hoops in the driveway and people out and about taking walks with their dogs, and you realize this wouldn't have happened without what we did. And there's just so much gratification and appreciation for looking back and spending 40 years in an industry and having a career that does give back and continues to give back.
Yeah. And Tom, that's certainly not Pollyanna. It's real life. And you've helped create that. So personally, I've appreciated your leadership and the contribution to this industry and sharing your story today. It's been a great conversation. And congratulations again on your induction into the California Homebuilding Foundation's Hall of Fame. And it's certainly a well-deserved recognition for you with what we've talked about. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on Unsheltered Conversations. I'm Scott Larson, and until next time, let's keep building homes, communities, and pathways to a better future.